I'm a paramedic. This is my story. So I'm a paramedic in the southern United States. I have been involved in emergency medical services and the volunteer fire service since I was a senior in high school. So at this point, this story was told. 7 years of it. In that time, I'd seen some really strange and frightening events, some which I couldn't explain. I was also aware that I had a lot of exposure to violence, both towards my patients and towards myself. I've been punched, kicked, bitten, plowed through by mental patients trying to get out of involuntary hold, cut, and even stabbed with a used needle by a jerk who didn't like the idea that I took his blood from the police after a DUI incident. But this incident was by far the most disturbing, not only for what happened to me and what could have happened to my partner, but for the events that preceded it and the fact that seemingly nothing was done after. In November 2011, I was working for a very large, nationally renowned ambulance company for which I no longer work for. While I won't name the company, I will say that they will cease to exist in 30 days because of a merger with another very large, nationally renowned ambulance company. Paramedics generally work with an EMT, and mine that night was a woman about my age, and 6 months, obviously pregnant. Alex, as we'll call her, was about 5'2", incredibly non-threatening, and a very pushy person. I'm 5'7", and at that time, maybe 180. I'm not a type A personality at all. Introverted and kind of a goofball. Not overly a take-charge, authority guy. I often joke that if I am serious about something, something has gone terribly wrong. As we arrived there, I immediately knew something was very off. This was an old neighborhood, dating back before World War II. The house was an old, shotgun-style house, where the rooms are directly behind one another. So the living room would empty out into a kitchen, which would empty into a bedroom. If the door was shut, the rest of the house was unknown. The lights were off, other than the light from the blue strobes of the cop cars. There was a deputy at the door, who said she was in the living room, but the deputies were all at their cars about 50 yards away from the main entrance. No one was doing first aid. The deputy said that the husband had found his wife face down on the floor and called the police. He said he knew his brother did it. The deputy warned me. The husband seemed drunk, and then vanished, back to his car. As we walk in, we see no one around, no husband, which should have been immediately raised a red flag. We found the woman laying between a couch and a living room table, with a recliner in the corner. The door to wherever was closed. But we went to work on the woman. She was beaten to a pulp. Her nose deformed, her scalp was split open, and she was unconscious. She had areas of bruising all over her, in some various stages. Another red flag. But there was work to do, and we sat stabilizing the woman, and beginning to proceed starting an IV and placing the neck collar to immobilize her. In our distracted state, we hadn't noticed the man step out of the bathroom. I just placed the collar and oxygen mask, and I was listening to her breathe sounds, when I heard the distant click of a breakdown shotgun and footsteps. My partner was at the door, with her back turned to get the stretcher off the porch. I stood straight up and came face to chest with nearly a 6'2" man standing there, putting a pair of 12-gauge shells into the shotgun. He was African American, massively built and drunk, and an angry scowl on his face. "I'm going to get them," he would repeat, looking at me with a gaze. If it could kill, would have cut me in half, no emotion other than anger at all. You could smell the alcohol. It was very sweaty and jittery. It felt like a movie playing that I was watching. All of the training of, if the scene is safe, get out, was rushing through my head, but at this point, I realized he would probably shoot me if I tried to run. As I stood up from his wife, I kept my eyes locked on his. I said, "Alex, get out, now." I heard her scream, and she must have turned around and saw him. "Alex, get out, now, I'll be fine," I repeated slowly, methodically. as I placed myself over his unconscious wife between him and my pregnant partner. She stopped, stared at me, and pointed the barrel of the shotgun straight at my face as he did so. Again, no emotion, no concern, just anger and rage. Alex took off down the driveway screaming for the deputies. "I'm going to kill them. I'm going to kill the ones who did this. Get out of my way, or I'll kill you too." Cold as ice, and with a growing and incredibly creepy smile, he said this. I thought it was a joke at first, someone's sick idea of a prank. "Well, please don't miss," was my response with a laugh. He wasn't laughing. He just stared ahead of me, gun at his hip pointed at my face. I replied, "If you shoot me, she's gonna die. I'm the only one who can care for her," was my response. At this point, I was trying hard not to break down. "She dies, you die," was his response, and he sat down on the recliner across from us. He still had that smile, that creepy, toothy smile and those white eyes bearing down on me. I had shivers going down my spine. I thought this was it. I thought this was how I was going to die. All I could think about as I worked these tokenly bandaged these cuts on this woman's head, and how I was going to look up and suddenly feel and see nothing. My head would be hamburger meat. But then, he lowered the gun and looked at his wife. "My brother makes me do this. He makes me do all of that. You see, she was cheating on me. I had to. I didn't want to hurt her. So she made me." That same creepy grin. That's the same wide-eyed look. The same sweaty, trembling behavior. I was running out of things to do to keep this guy convinced that I was busy saving her life. All of a sudden, I finally heard screaming, and then was blinded by flashlights. The deputies had been called back to the scene after they had left by my partner. When she realized that they had gone looking for the brother, she called over the radio and had them come back. They stood there, guns drawn, yelling at the man to drop the shotgun. He did, and they threw him into the ground and cuffed him. He started crying, screaming of how she was dead, and how it was his brother's fault, not his, and to leave him alone. Standing there, shaking, no trembling, and wondering what the fuck had happened. We regained our composure, got our injured patient back to the ambulance, and took her to the local trauma center. When we got back, a deputy took a report from us, and we had to file an incident report with our employer. We never heard anything after that. Fast forward to 2013. I'm not working in the country anymore. While I occasionally see Alex and treat the whole incident as a joke, I don't really talk about him that much. I never saw anything on the news about us, thanks to FSM, and honestly, I never pushed the issue. I'm working on another service at this time. I'm picking up a kid from the country's hospital when I see Alex and mention the event, and ask whatever happened. She pulls me aside and tells me the rest of the story, and at that time I realized more how just as close I was from dying that night. The woman had regained consciousness the day after the attack, and told the hospital staff that her husband had been drinking heavily that day, and not taking his medicine. He had begun accusing her of sleeping with his brother that night, and started hitting her until she got knocked against the living room table and blacked out. He had eventually pled to domestic violence charge and was placed in an independent psychiatric facility, AFAIK. He's still there. The creepy thing? His brother died in 2002 in a car accident in another state. According to the wife, he took medication because of a lucid and intense hallucinations of his brother doing things to people and telling him what to do. The deputies knew the house had a history of mental illness calls and never warned or flagged the address on their dispatch system. It raised more questions than answers. Why hadn't he charged with the attack on us? Why did the deputies leave them there? And why wasn't anything done to follow up to help us? So there you all are. I was nearly murdered by a psychotic, abusive husband while helping his wife, and then the deputies left us alone.